She didn't smile first. She didn't look away either. She just held my gaze like she already knew something I didn't. Like whatever was about to happen between us had already been decided. The cafe inside the bookstore always felt like a place people went to be left alone. Late afternoon light spilled through the tall front windows, stretching long golden lines across wooden floors and the spines of neatly arranged shelves. The air carried the soft scent of paper and roasted coffee beans, warm and familiar. I liked sitting near the back corner where conversations faded into a low murmur and no one expected anything from me. I was halfway through a novel, not really reading it, just turning pages to pass time, when I felt it, that strange awareness of being watched. Not in an uncomfortable way, not intrusive, just intentional. When I looked up, I saw her. She sat alone at a small round table near the window. A porcelain cup rested between her hands, fingers curved lightly around it as if absorbing its warmth. She wasn't scrolling through her phone or distracted by anything else. She was looking at me, not curiously, not accidentally, deliberately. Her expression wasn't bold, but it wasn't shy either. Calm, measured, like she had already decided I was worth noticing. The sunlight touched the side of her face, softening the faint lines near her eyes, catching in her dark hair that fell neatly over one shoulder. There was something graceful about the way she held herself, back straight, shoulders relaxed, movements unhurried. She looked like someone who knew how to be still without feeling small. I glanced down at my book again, pretending I hadn't noticed. My heart was beating harder than it should have been for something so simple. It didn't make sense. Women looked at men every day. That wasn't unusual, but this felt different. A few seconds passed, maybe longer. When I looked up again, she was still there, still watching. And this time, when our eyes met, she didn't look away. Her gaze held steady, warm but assessing. It wasn't flirtation in the obvious sense. It felt deeper than that, like she was studying something in me, or recognizing it. Then, slowly, one corner of her mouth lifted. Not a wide smile, just enough to change the air between us. Something shifted in my chest. A tightness. Awareness. I felt suddenly visible, like I'd stepped into a quiet spotlight only she could see. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe she was just lost in thought and my direction happened to be convenient. But the way her fingers traced the rim of her cup, slow, absent-minded, patient, told me she wasn't distracted. She knew I'd noticed, and she didn't seem bothered by it. A server passed between us, breaking the line of sight for a moment. When the view cleared, she tilted her head slightly, almost thoughtfully. Not questioning, not uncertain. Certain. That was what unsettled me the most. She looked at me like she'd already decided something. Like this, whatever this was, wasn't random. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I couldn't look away. I told myself she wouldn't come over. Women like her didn't cross rooms for men like me. They didn't initiate. They didn't close distance. They certainly didn't choose. So when her chair shifted softly against the wooden floor and I saw her stand, my pulse kicked hard in my throat. She didn't rush. She moved with that same calm certainty, carrying her cup in one hand, the other resting loosely at her side. Every step was unhurried, like she had nowhere else to be. She stopped beside my table. "Is it good?" she asked, nodding toward the book in my hands. Her voice was low and smooth, steady in a way that made me straighten in my chair without meaning to. There was no awkwardness in her tone, no forced charm, just genuine curiosity. "Yeah," I said, clearing my throat. "It's different, in a good way." She smiled faintly, then gestured to the empty chair across from me. "May I?" I should have hesitated. I didn't. When she sat down, she didn't drop into the chair casually. She lowered herself slowly, adjusting slightly closer to the table than necessary. Close enough that I could catch the subtle scent of her perfume, something soft and warm, not overpowering. It mixed with the coffee in the air and settled somewhere in my senses. "So what makes it different?" she asked, resting her chin lightly on her knuckles as she listened. And she really listened. Not the polite kind of listening where someone waits for their turn to speak. Her eyes stayed on mine when I explained the plot. When I fumbled for the right words, she didn't interrupt. She gave me space to think, space to finish. I wasn't used to that. Most people glanced at their phones, nodded absent-mindedly, shifted attention. She leaned slightly forward instead, her elbow brushing the edge of the table. The movement brought her just a little closer. Not enough to invade my space, just enough to make me aware of it. When she laughed softly at something I said, her hand reached out instinctively, resting against my forearm for a brief moment. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't bold, but her fingers were warm and steady. The touch lasted only a second, maybe two, but I felt it long after she withdrew her hand. A grounding pressure. Intentional, like she wasn't afraid of contact. You explain things thoughtfully, she said. Not many people do. There was something about the way she said it, like it wasn't a casual compliment, like she meant it. We drifted into other topics without noticing. Travel, music, places we'd been, places we hadn't. She spoke about cities I'd only seen in photographs, about quiet coastal towns and art exhibits and late-night conversations that lasted until sunrise. She didn't brag. She remembered. There was history in the way she told stories, experience layered in her voice, confidence shaped by years of living fully. At one point, she tilted her head slightly, studying me again. You notice details, she said softly. I can tell. My heart beat heavier. No one had ever said that to me before. And the way she held my gaze, steady, unwavering, made it feel like she wasn't just observing me. She was choosing to see me. The conversation wasn't rushed. It wasn't surface level. It felt personal too fast. And somehow, she didn't seem surprised by that at all. The shift happened quietly. Up until then, the conversation had felt easy, almost weightless. Words flowing without effort, laughter landing naturally between us. But awareness has a way of creeping in when things start to matter. She asked what I was working toward. Not what I was doing now, but what I was building. I hesitated. I'm still figuring it out, I admitted. Trying different things. Nothing permanent yet. She didn't react the way some people do. No polite nod masking judgment. Instead, she leaned back slightly, studying me with a softened expression. There's something brave about not settling too soon, she said. Most people rush into structures they don't even want. Her words should have reassured me. But that was when I noticed it. The subtle difference between us. She spoke about her work next. Not in detail, not boastfully, just matter of fact. Years in the same field. A leadership role. Stability. A life that sounded established. The kind of grounded certainty that only comes after enough time has passed to make mistakes and survive them. I found myself imagining her at 25. Was she already this composed? Already this self-assured? The thought made me suddenly aware of my own posture, the way my foot bounced lightly under the table, the faint uncertainty I carried like background noise. She noticed. Of course she did. Her gaze softened, and without asking permission, she reached across the small space between us. Her fingers lifted toward my forehead, brushing gently through a loose strand of hair that had fallen forward. The touch was light, brief, but intimate. Her fingertips skimmed my temple before falling away, and the warmth of her skin lingered like a quiet echo. You overthink, she murmured, almost teasing. I can see it in your eyes. My breath caught, not because of what she said, but because of how easily she crossed that invisible line. There was no hesitation in her movement. No epaligi, just calm certainty. For the first time, I wondered what the room saw. If someone looked over at us right now, what would they assume? A confident woman in her 40s, self-possessed and graceful. A younger man, still carving his path. Would they think it was mismatched? Temporary? A curiosity? The thought tightened something in my chest. She must have sensed the shift in me, because her expression changed. Not defensive, not dismissive, just attentive. What is it? She asked softly. I almost lied. Instead, I said, do you ever think about how this looks? Her lips curved slightly, but not in amusement. More like recognition. People always think, she replied calmly. It's their favorite hobby. There was no bitterness in her tone, just experience. She reached for her coffee again, fingers wrapping around the cup, but her eyes stayed on mine. I stopped building my life around other people's comfort a long time ago. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't defiant. They were settled. That was the difference. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She had already decided what mattered. And as she looked at me again, steady, assured, almost protective, I realized something else. The age gap wasn't the loudest thing in the space between us. Fear was, and she didn't seem to have it. We left the bookstore without deciding to. The conversation had simply stretched beyond the walls, beyond the closing announcements echoing softly through the shelves. Outside, the evening air carried a faint chill, the kind that settles in slowly as the sun disappears. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting warm halos against the darkening sky. We walked side by side along the sidewalk, not too close at first. A comfortable distance. Enough space to feel independent. Enough closeness to feel aware. Our shoulders nearly brushed once. Then again. Each time, neither of us commented. The city felt quieter than usual. Cars passing in low hums, distant laughter from a restaurant patio, the rhythmic sound of our footsteps staying unintentionally in sync. She slowed slightly as we approached a crosswalk. I slowed too. That was when it happened. Our hands brushed. It could have been accidental. A simple miscalculation of space. But she didn't pull away. Her fingers lingered lightly against mine, the back of her hand grazing my knuckles. The contact was soft, exploratory. Testing. My breath tightened. For half a second, neither of us moved. Then, gently, deliberately, her fingers shifted, sliding between mine. Not rushed, not hesitant, intentional. Her palms settled fully against mine, warm and steady. Her grip wasn't tight, but it wasn't fragile either. It felt grounded, assured, like she wasn't asking for permission, just offering certainty. The warmth of her skin contrasted with the cool air around us, and suddenly the rest of the world felt distant. The noise dulled. The space narrowed. I became acutely aware of everything. The softness of her hand, the smoothness of her fingers interlaced with mine, the calm rhythm of her breathing beside me. She didn't look at me immediately. She simply kept walking, as if holding my hand was the most natural progression in the world. That steadiness made my nerves feel louder by comparison. My pulse thudded in my ears. My thumb shifted slightly against her hand, unsure where to rest. She noticed. Without breaking stride, she adjusted her grip, her thumb brushing slowly across the back of my hand in a quiet, reassuring motion. It was subtle, but it anchored me. At the next corner, she stepped a little closer. Close enough that her shoulder rested lightly against my chest when she turned to say something. The contact was soft, but I felt the shape of her through the thin fabric of our clothes. Warm, present, real. She tilted her head up to look at me, eyes reflecting the amber glow of the streetlight. "You're very aware of this," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I swallowed. "Yeah." Her lips curved, not teasing, understanding. That's not a bad thing. For a moment, neither of us moved. Her hand still in mine, her body close enough that I could feel the gentle rise and fall of her breath. There was no rush in her posture, no uncertainty in her expression. She wasn't experimenting. She wasn't confused. She knew exactly what she was doing. And standing there beneath the dim streetlight, her fingers intertwined with mine, I realized something that both steadied and terrified me. She wasn't waiting to see what would happen next. She had already decided. We found a quiet bench a few blocks away, tucked beneath a tall tree whose branches swayed gently in the night breeze. The city noise felt distant here, softened into a low hum that barely reached us. The streetlight above cast a warm, muted glow, outlining her profile in gold. She sat first, smoothing her coat slightly before settling back. I took the space beside her, close but not touching. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It felt reflective, like both of us were sorting through something unspoken. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders rising and falling in a measured rhythm. The confident woman from the café, the one who carried herself with quiet certainty, seemed smaller somehow in this light. Not weaker, just human. "I'm not usually impulsive," she said finally, her voice softer now. I turned toward her. This feels impulsive. She gave a faint smile. A little. Her fingers traced an absent pattern along the edge of the bench between us. Thoughtful. Distracted. People assume things about women my age, she continued. That we've already had our great loves. That we're finished with wanting something new. That we should be practical. There was no bitterness in her tone, just tired honesty. I watched her profile as she spoke. The way her jaw tightened slightly before she relaxed it again. The way her gaze drifted forward, unfocused, as if revisiting memories she didn't fully want to describe. I've built a good life, she said. Stable, comfortable, respectable. A pause. But comfort can get very quiet. The word quiet lingered between us. She shifted slightly, turning toward me now. Her knee brushed mine. This time she didn't adjust away. Do you know what loneliness feels like? She asked gently, when everything on the outside looks complete. I didn't answer immediately. I wasn't sure I had the right to. Instead, I did something simpler. I let my hand rest on the bench between us, palm open. She looked down at it. Then slowly, she placed her hand in mine. Not laced fingers this time, just her palm resting against my skin, softer now, almost tentative. The warmth was still there, but it carried something heavier. Her thumb moved slightly, brushing across my knuckles in a small, absent motion. The gesture wasn't seductive. It was grounding, as if she needed the reassurance of contact more than the thrill of it. I'm admired, she said quietly. Complimented. Pursued. A faint, almost self-conscious laugh, but rarely understood. Her head tilted, and after a brief hesitation, she let it rest lightly against my shoulder. The contact was careful at first, as if she was testing whether I would stiffen or shift away. I didn't. Her hair brushed against my jaw. I could feel the gentle weight of her leaning into me. Not dramatic, not desperate. Just tired of holding herself up alone. The world narrowed again. I became aware of her breathing, slower now, calmer. With my free hand, I covered hers more fully, my thumb tracing a small, steady circle against the back of her hand. Not to lead, not to claim, just to reassure. She exhaled, a quiet sound that felt like release. In that moment, she didn't feel intimidating or untouchable. She felt real, and I realized something important. Her confidence wasn't armor. It was what she had learned to wear, so no one would see how much she still wanted to be chosen. The night had deepened around us, the sky now a dark velvet scattered with faint stars barely visible through the city glow. The air carried a cool stillness, wrapping around us in a quiet cocoon. We hadn't moved from the bench. Neither of us seemed in a hurry to break whatever had settled between us. Her head still rested lightly against my shoulder. But something had shifted. Not distance, intention. She straightened slowly, lifting her head, though her hand remained in mine. The warmth of her palm felt different now. Less tentative, more certain. She turned toward me fully, drawing one leg slightly beneath her so she could face me without twisting. The movement brought her closer, close enough that our knees touched, close enough that I could see the fine details in her expression. The faint crease near her brow when she was thinking. The softness in her eyes that hadn't been there earlier. She searched my face quietly, not nervously, deliberately. That same look from the cafe returned, the one that made me feel like she'd already reached a conclusion long before I understood the question. Her fingers slipped from my hand, but only to move higher, resting lightly at my waist. Not possessive, not urgent, just present. The fabric of my shirt shifted beneath her touch, and I felt the warmth of her palm through the thin layer between us. You're trying very hard to be careful, she said softly. The faint hint of a smile touched her lips, but her eyes stayed serious. I don't want to assume, I replied. You're not assuming, she said. You're hesitating. The word wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. Her thumb traced a small, slow line along my side, just enough movement to make my breath falter. She noticed that too. I've spent years thinking things through, she continued, weighing consequences, considering appearances. A slight pause. It gets exhausting. The breeze lifted a strand of her hair across her cheek. Without thinking, I reached up and tucked it gently behind her ear. My fingers brushed along her jaw for the briefest second before falling away. She didn't pull back. Instead, she leaned in slightly, closing the space I had just created, close enough that I could feel her breath against my neck. Warm, steady. My heart pounded louder than the distant traffic. Her hand slid from my waist to the center of my chest, resting there, right over my heartbeat. Not pressing, just feeling. "You feel everything," she murmured. Before I could respond, she lifted her face toward mine. Not to my lips, to my cheek. Her lips pressed there softly, slow, deliberate, lingering just long enough for the warmth to spread outward in a quiet wave. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't uncertain. It was chosen. When she pulled back, her forehead hovered near mine, close enough that our breaths mingled. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look unsure. Her eyes held mine with steady clarity. "I don't need more time to know," she said gently. "No apology. No dramatic declaration. Just certainty." And sitting there beneath the dim glow of the streetlight, her hand still resting over my heart, I realized something just as clearly. I wasn't afraid of what people would think anymore. I was afraid of letting her walk away. And for the first time that night, I stopped hesitating. There was no dramatic declaration, no impulsive decision to redefine everything overnight. What we did instead felt quieter and somehow stronger. We chose to keep showing up. A few days later, I returned to the bookstore café at the same hour. Not because we had agreed to meet, just because something in me hoped. She was already there, sitting at the same table by the window, sunlight spilling across her shoulders exactly the way it had the first time I saw her. This time, when her eyes lifted and found mine, her smile wasn't subtle. It was warm, inviting. I walked toward her without overthinking it, without rehearsing what to say. When I reached the table, she didn't wait for awkward formalities. She stood, closing the small space between us, and her hand rested lightly in my arm, fingers curling just enough to hold. "I was wondering how long you'd make me wait," she said softly. There was ease in her tone now, a comfort that hadn't existed before. We sat together, closer than before. Our knees touched beneath the table, neither of us adjusting away. The air between us no longer felt fragile or uncertain. It felt understood. At one point, as I spoke about a job opportunity one wasn't sure I was ready for, doubt crept in my voice. I didn't mean for it to. It just slipped out. She noticed immediately. She always did. Her hand lifted to my face, slow enough for me to register the movement, gentle enough that it never startled me. Her palms cupped my cheeks, thumbs resting just below my ears. Her touch was warm, steady, grounding. "Don't shrink yourself," she said quietly. Her eyes held mine with a softness that felt protective, not controlling. Encouraging, not instructing. I leaned forward without thinking, my forehead resting lightly against hers. The contact was simple, almost still. I could feel her breath brushing softly against my lips, her hands sliding from my face to the back of my neck, fingers resting there in a calm embrace. There was no urgency between us. No need to prove anything. Outside the window, people passed by. Some glanced in our direction. Some didn't. For the first time, I didn't care. Because what existed between us wasn't built on impulse anymore. It was built on choice. Later, as we walked out together, she slipped her arm through mine naturally, her shoulder leaning lightly against my side. The gesture wasn't hesitant. It wasn't hidden. It was open. "I don't want careful," she admitted quietly as we stepped into the afternoon light. "I want real." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just confidence, not just experience, but hope. The same hope I felt. "I want real too," I said. Her smile softened, and she leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to my cheek once more. Not to start something uncertain, but to seal something already understood. The world might see numbers, but when she looks at me, there's no calculation in her eyes, only decision. And now, standing beside her, hand in hand, I've made mine too,